Hey everyone, welcome to the Caring Counsel podcast, a premier feature of the American Association of Christian Counselors. Our hope and our heart in all of this is to have clinical conversation engaging around the topics of mental health and matters of faith. Co-hosted by myself, Zach Clinton, Vice President of the AACC, alongside of my dad, Dr. Tim Clinton, President of the AACC.
This podcast has really been historically connected to the council council tapes that we had back in years gone by. Yeah. What we were trying to do and what we're going to focus on is meaningful conversation with leading experts in the field, whether mental health or ministry leaders, around topics especially related to today's generations. We want to bring that kind of information to you to help, quote, increase your counseling and ministry effectiveness. That's what this is all about. They've always been a special feature part of our membership benefit program, what people have loved. And so with that,
you guys, we hope and pray that you enjoy this week's edition. Dr. Gary Chapman, thank you so much for joining us today, my friend.
Well, thank you, Zach. It's great to be with you.
So great to have you here on our Caring Counsel podcast, the feature presentation of the American Association of Christian Counselors, where our hope is to further educate, equip, and encourage people helpers to more effectively care for people God's way. Today, our conversation is going to be geared all around love and relationships with the love doctor himself, Dr. Gary Chapman. Sir, you are someone who does not need an introduction, but just to further acquaint our leaders, our students, and our members with a little bit of a better understanding of who you are and all the incredible work you've done in this space, I'm going to go ahead and read your bio anyways. So here we go. Dr. Gary Chapman is an author, speaker, and counselor who has a passion for people and for helping them form lasting relationships. Dr. Chapman is a well-known marriage counselor and director of marriage seminars. The 5 Love Languages is one of his most popular titles, topping various bestseller charts for years, selling over 20 million copies, and has been on the New York Times bestseller list since 2007. Gary's been directly involved in real-life family counseling since the beginning of his ministry years, and his nationally syndicated radio programs air nationally on Moody Radio Network and over 400 affiliate stations. Dr. Chapman, clearly, you have been a pioneering leader in this space for quite some time. But as we begin, I would just be interested in you just sharing a little bit more about some of your counseling, clinical, but also ministry experience with all of our members. And also help us understand, what is it that got you in this lane or in this space of specifically working with love and relationships?
You know, Zach, to be honest with you, I got pushed into counseling. I joined the church staff to be the director of the adult education program and also to start a college ministry. And in that context, I ended up teaching class for college students on preparation for marriage because I said, someday you're probably going to get married. Right. And then I started what we call the Christian Education Institute on Sunday nights, in which we offered courses on all kinds of things. And once in a while, I would teach a class on marriage. And when I did, the people that were hurting would want to talk. So they would come to see me. Counseling was not in my job description when I came to the church 50 years ago. I've been on the same church staff for 50 years. So I got pushed into counseling. You know, when I came along, Zach, now remember, this was a long time ago. They didn't even offer a master's in counseling at the seminary when I was there. And when I got married, I never read a book on marriage. I don't know if they had books back then. and we had 1 hour with the pastor who married us. And that was mostly on the wedding. And the only thing I remember that he told us, it had to do with money. And he said, you know, I just want to suggest that each of you have a little money you can do what you want to with. You know, just spend it however you want to. The rest of it's in a common pool, and you pay your regular monthly bills. That's the only thing I remember as far as counseling and preparation for marriage. And maybe that's why my wife and I had so many problems in our marriage. And looking back on that part of our life, I'm really grateful that we went through a hard time, because otherwise I probably would not have empathy, you know, for people who sit in my office and say we have no hope, because I remember when I felt that way. So counseling then became a major part of my ministry, and later on it was actually put in my job description as a pastoral counselor. And so for years I was seeing 20 to 25 couples a week.
Wow.
And nobody told me that was too many.
Right.
But at any rate, and that's kind of my background. I learned everything I could, during that time, read everything I could, and just tried to learn how to be empathetic with people, and then asking God for wisdom. The Bible says if you lack wisdom, ask for wisdom. And I remember many times sitting in my office and listening to the story of the couple in front of me, and silently I'm praying, oh God, I don't have a clue. Please give me wisdom on how to take the next step with this couple. And it's amazing in those days how God would bring thoughts to my mind that would be very, very helpful. So yeah, it's been a learning process for me in terms of counseling people, but it's been a wonderful, wonderful, rewarding part of my ministry.
Let me tell you this, Dr. Chapman, we're so grateful for, again, the pioneering leadership and the efforts that you've put into this space, because a lot of your work are things that we're now able to use within our own sessions and when we're sitting across from a couple or a marriage that's on the rocks. And so I appreciate you, so grateful for your time and investment in this space. Something that my dad, Dr. Tim Clinton, has always said, Dr. Chapman, is that there's nothing more beautiful than being in a relationship with someone who actually loves you. And there's nothing more hurtful or damaging or wounding than being in a relationship with someone who maybe doesn't love you, or at least that's how you perceive that they don't love you. God, He hardwired us for relationship, right? To love and be loved vertically with Him, but also horizontally with those that are closest to us. And I think, though, I've never met someone that didn't want to win at love, Dr. Chapman, someone who didn't want to have a loving marriage, someone who didn't want to have a healthy relationship. But I do believe there are a lot of culprits that will come in and they'll weasel their way into our relationships and make us lose at love. Sir, in your experience throughout the years, what do you think are some of those main culprits that cause a lot of couples to lose at love?
Well, I think one is just the reality that we come down off that emotional high that we call being in love or falling in love. And no one ever told me that. I mean, I was always told, if you've got the real thing, it's going to last forever. And I didn't know, what I know now from research, that the average lifespan of that euphoric stage is 2 years.
Wow.
Some a little less, some a little longer. We come down off that high. And I didn't know that. So my wife and I dated 2 years before we got married. And I came down pretty soon after the honeymoon.
Yeah.
And everything my mother had warned me about her was true. And I'm sure what her mother warned her about me was probably true too. And we had arguments, and because I knew I was right and she knew she was right. And I remember one night we were arguing, and it was pouring down rain outside. In the middle of the argument, my wife just walked out the door and walked out into the rain. Wow. And I thought, man, this is bad. When a woman walks in the rain, it's bad, So I think it's one thing is just the lack of awareness that the common couple has, that it's normal to come down off that super high. Everybody comes down off that high. And that's when you have to learn how to communicate love to each other. That's why I think the love languages have helped so many couples through the years, is because, you can be very sincere, and in your mind, you can be expressing love to the other person. But if it's not in a language that's meaningful to them, they don't feel loved, even though you in your mind are loving them. And so, you live for a while with a lack of love, the feeling of love, and then you have the arguments, and that's when you begin to think, man, we've made a mistake. This is not working. We're too different. It's never going to work. So I think that's a part of how people get to the place where they just feel like it's just not going to work.
It's so good, and I think you're hitting it right on the head, because my next question really revolves around, I remember this experience. My dad frequently shares a story of how he received a call from a man who was living down in Florida way back in the day, a number of years ago. And this man called my dad just frustrated. Tim, I'm done, right? I want out of this marriage. And my dad let him continue to go on. And as he did, he was explaining a little bit more of his frustration. Like, she just doesn't get me. I do everything I can. There's nothing else I feel like I can possibly do. I feel like I could never love her enough. She doesn't understand me. And all we do is fight, Tim. And my dad was able to share just kind of like an experience that you just shared in his early years of marriage to my mom, Julie. He struggled with some of the same things, but the lesson he learned in the midst of his frustration was the exact same thing that you just said. You can love someone with everything you've got, and they can perceive it that you really don't love them, or else they're not picking up on the message that you're putting down. Dr. Chapman, you obviously have insinuated a couple of times now in our conversation your 5 love languages, a work that has been, instrumental in all of our lives, I would say, and I think every listener out there probably knows of your 5 love languages, but specifically touching on them: gifts, words of affirmation, acts of service, quality time, physical touch. Sir, could you just give us a little bit more of an understanding of each of those love languages and why they are so imperative to understand to more effectively communicate love to one another?
Yeah, well, let me tell you how I came up with the 5, because sometimes people have asked me, are there 6? And I said, well, maybe so. I'm not dogmatic. But what happened was I kept hearing in my office over and over again, I just feel like he doesn't love me or she doesn't love me. And the other one would say exactly what you just said. Well, I don't know why they wouldn't feel loved. I remember the husband, he said, I wash the dishes, I vacuum the floors, I mow the grass, I wash the car, I help her with the laundry. What else can I do? And so I realized there has to be a pattern to this. So what I did, eventually, was to look back over several years of notes that I made when I was counseling and ask myself the question, when someone said, I feel like my spouse doesn't love me, what did they want? What were they complaining about? And their answers fell into 5 categories. And then I called them the 5 love languages. I started using that term. And I would help couples share the idea first, and then try to help them discover the other person's love language and challenge them to go home and try it. And sometimes they would come back in 3 weeks and say, Gary, this is changing everything. I mean, the whole climate's changing between us now, So these were the 5. And as I said, I wasn't dogmatic to say there's only 5. I'm a little more dogmatic now than I was then. I'm not saying there's not a 6th love language, but so far the ones people have suggested fall as what I call dialects within these 5 languages. But one of them is words of affirmation. It's simply looking for things about the other person that you can genuinely affirm. You look nice in that outfit. I really appreciate what you did. One of the things I like about you. Now, I did have a lady say to me, Zach, she said, Dr. Chapman, I know it would be good if I could give my husband some positive words. She said, but to be honest with you, I can't think of anything good to say about the man. And I said, well, does he ever take a shower? She said, well, yes. I said, well, how often? She said, well, every day. I said, if I were you, I'd start there.
That's it.
I said, there are men who don't.
That's right.
I've never met a man, woman, boy, or girl that you couldn't find something good to say about them. I think it's Proverbs 18, verse 21, that says, life and death is in the power of the tongue. Right. We can kill people, or we can give them life. So words of affirmation. Another is acts of service, doing something for them that they would like for you to do. I think it's in third John, maybe, that says, love not only in words, but also in deeds. So in a marriage, this would be such things as washing dishes and cooking meals and vacuuming floors and washing the car and walking the dog and changing the baby's diaper, or anything that they would like for you to do. And sometimes, the old saying is, actions speak louder than words. If this is their love language, that's true. Actions will speak louder than words for these people. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. Zach, before I studied counseling at all, I majored in cultural anthropology and later did a master's in cultural anthropology, studying cultures all over the world, how they're organized. We've never found a culture where gift giving is not an expression of love. It's universal to give gifts. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got for me. And the gift doesn't have to be expensive. We've always said it's the thought that counts. Right. And I better remind people, it's not the thought left in your head. It's the gift that came out of the thought in your head. Okay. I've sometimes said to guys, in the spring and summer, you can get free flowers. just go out in your backyard and pick
That's
one.
right.
That's what the kids do.
That's it.
Or if you don't have any flowers in your yard, check out your neighbor's yard. And I don't mean steal them. I mean say to him, my wife likes those flowers. Could I give you $5 for that flower? And I can almost guarantee you, your neighbor's going to say, oh, man, I don't want your money. Take the flower.
That's right.
I had a guy tell me the other day, he said, my wife's language is gifts. And he said, I was walking one morning and I saw a bird feather. And I picked it up and brushed it off, took it home, and I said, honey, I want to give you this bird feather that I found when I was walking this morning, because it reminded me that you are the wind beneath my wings. And she said, oh, that is so sweet. He gave her words of affirmation and a gift.
Right.
He hit a home run.
That's right.
And then number 4 is quality time. Giving the person your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting there watching television together. Someone else has your attention. Quality time, the TV is off, the computer is down, we're not answering our cell phone, we're giving each other our undivided attention. Sharing life, talking about whatever we want to talk about, but giving them our undivided attention. And it's not always talking.
Right.
Sometimes quality time is working with them on a project that they would like for you to help them with. Maybe it's planting a little flower garden in the front yard, and you're out there for 2 hours working together on it. And you're talking, but the important thing's not the flower. Mostly, the important thing's not the flowers. Right. The important thing is we're spending time with them. If this is their language, it's going to really speak loudly to them.
Exactly.
That you would take your time, 2 hours, and work with me doing something that I really wanted to get done. So quality time. And then physical touch. We've long known the emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. Long before they understand the meaning of the word love, they feel love by physical touch. So in a marriage, that is holding hands and kissing and embracing in the sexual part of marriage, and all that. And driving down the road, you just put your hand on their leg, just affirming touches. So those are the basic 5. And of course, the basic idea is that out of those 5, each of us has a primary love language. One of the 5 speaks more deeply to us emotionally than the other 4.
Dr. Chapman, I'd be interested in knowing, based on your experience in working with couples as you teach these 5 love languages, I would assume that obviously our responsibility when we know these things is to be able to primarily communicate that specific love language with our spouse, with our significant other, that is their primary love language. But is it fair to say that your primary love language, the way in which you like to receive love the most, is typically what you like to give love as well?
Typically, that's true, but it's not true for about 25% of the people.
Wow.
Most people by nature, the one that you express, even if you don't know the love language concept, the way you express love to them is what you would like to receive. But about 25% of the people, it's the opposite. I mean, the one they express is not the one that they want to receive.
Wow.
And my explanation for that, and I don't know that this is totally explains it, but is that very likely the one they speak most naturally, they were taught to speak by their parents.
Makes sense.
And so they do it because they were taught to do it, not because it's what they want to do. So, but that's it is true that for about 75% of the people, what you speak most naturally is what you would like to receive.
And that makes sense, like you said, patterns, generational patterns, things that you've seen displayed, things that you've been taught to communicate love languages in that way, get kind of passed down, and that's kind of then a natural tendency for you to give love in that same way. But working to make sure that you better understand your spouse, like you said, you understand what is their primary love language, and then being intentional about communicating that to them each and every day. Dr. Chapman, I would say that, the majority of our members, our students, our leaders that are tuning in, watching and listening to this conversation today, they've probably been like you. They've had a lot of sessions. They probably had a lot of phone calls that were in crisis of couples and marriages that were on the rocks, couples that felt like they were in lifeless and unloving marriages up to this point, emptiness. But for you, Dr. Chapman, I'd be interested, when you're sitting across from a couple who just feels like they're not communicating well, who feels like there's just so much friction and tension in that relationship, what are some of the initial steps that you begin incorporating within that relationship to hopefully help them spark a little bit more of that intimacy and to hopefully help them salvage the love and appreciation that you have for each other? And ultimately, how do you help them begin again?
Well, I think the first step is hear their story.
Yeah.
Listen. And most counselors realize this. We listen about 2/3 of the time.
Yeah.
We listen more than we talk, because to try to address an issue when you haven't heard the issue is going to be futile. So I think you listen to their story and obviously empathize with their story. The Bible says, weep with those who weep. And when you hear their story, you can see why they have no hope.
Yeah.
And when I hear their story, obviously I reflect back on my own struggles in my own marriage when I had those feelings that it's not going to work. And so you listen to their story, first of all, and be empathetic with their story, saying such things as, I can see how you'd feel that way. That makes a lot of sense. And then I sometimes say, after hearing what you said, I can understand why you would feel like there's just no hope. So let me throw out an idea. Would you be willing to go on my hope? Because I have hope for you. I mean, in my own marriage, I remember when I felt like you've just said. And through the years, I've worked with many couples who have felt what you feel. And I've seen them be radical change. So if you would be willing to go on my hope for a while, I'll be happy to meet with you. And we'll begin to see what can happen if we can take some steps, one at a time, and just see what happens.
Yeah.
And most of the time, they say, well, okay. You see, they came in there really thinking that they were going to get the counselor to tell them, yeah, I think you ought to get a divorce, as bad as it is. They just want affirmation that they should split, But when you put it that way, you're not asking them to have any different feelings. You're just saying that you have hope for them. And if they're willing, you'll be glad to meet with them. So to me, that's the starting point. And then we just think in terms of, what might be the first step. And just a little step is a step in the right direction. Right. And if we can come to that first session with just at least one, maybe the step is just, let's just agree that for a week, we'll call a truce.
Yep.
And just not fight each other for a week. Just smile at each other. Yep. If you can't say anything positive, just smile.
That's right.
But and begin to take little steps with them. And as they begin to see, it was better. It's step by step that they come somewhere down the road to have hope and to see, man, this is getting better. Yeah.
I like that, sir. That question, are you willing to go off of my hope because I have hope for you? That's so powerful. And I'm reminded of Dr. Rick Rigsby. His dad taught him an invaluable lesson when he was going through a really difficult time and he lost his first wife, Trina. And what he says in there is that his dad told him, you can't lose something that God gave you. You haven't lost hope. You've simply lost perspective, right? And just helping couples realign that perspective. Like you said, even small steps, that truce, I typically call it a ceasefire. Don't intentionally damage or wound each other, right? And for the next week, for the next however many days, just do something that's kind. Even like you said, even if it's a simple smile, a simple gesture, do something that would communicate love in a more effective way. For you, Dr. Chapman, as we unpack these 5 love languages that you did so brilliantly for us just a few seconds ago, for a lot of us, it's easy for us to see these things and just think this is just going to be applied to marriages and to relationships. But a lot of what you've done in your love languages series throughout the years is you've helped us understand that we can apply those love languages to other meaningful relationships in our lives as well, such as parent-child, within the workforce, in the workplace. Sir, help us understand how we can begin to apply, again, those 5 love languages in other areas and relationships in our lives besides our marriage.
Yeah, well, I discovered them originally, of course, in the marriage relationships, but I realized rather quickly that they applied to children as well. And that's when I teamed up with Dr. Ross Campbell, who's in heaven now, but he was a psychiatrist, Christian psychiatrist, who had spent 30 years working with children. And we wrote the 5 love languages of children, same 5 languages, but applied to children. Because children who feel love growing up grow up emotionally healthy. And children who grow up with what I call an empty love tank and they don't feel loved, they grow up with many internal emotional struggles. And in the teenage years, they will likely go looking for love in the wrong places. So that was the first book that after the original book. And then I had parents who said, we've been using that thing with children and it's really been good, but now they're teenagers and it doesn't seem to be working.
Right.
Does their love language change? So I wrote the 5 love languages of teenagers. And my basic thesis is, I don't think the love language changes, the primary love language, but you have to use new dialects because what you've been doing, they consider childish. Yes. And now you have to use more adult words, or different kind of touches. And so those were the 3. Then I had a lot of single adults who said to me, I know you wrote that book originally for married couples, but I've been using it in all my relationships and it really does help. And so why don't you write one for singles? So I interviewed a lot of single adults and wrote the 5 love languages for singles, applying this to the singles' relationship with their parents, their siblings, their college roommates, their dating partners, and their work associates. So it was just one by one. I don't remember the order, but, I wrote one on how this applies with blended families. Wow. Wrote it with Ron Deal, who spent 25 years working with blended families. Because even if you know the stepchild's primary language, they won't necessarily receive it from you immediately. Right. Because they don't know you. They're not connected to you. So we talk about incremental steps in speaking their love language. A very helpful book for blended families. Then we wrote one for families who have a child that has physical or emotional challenges, special needs families. And I wrote that with a lady who has a special needs child and has worked in that area for 20 years. So in all of the books, many of these books, I use co-authors, who've experienced it. We wrote one on how the love language can help you when you lose a baby, the birth of a baby, a little baby, and how that can help the husband and wife if they've got the love language thing, because they're probably going to process their grief in a different way. And it's really important that they feel loved as they walk through that process. Most recently, we released one on how the love languages works with adopted children. Wow. And I wrote that with a lady who has 2 adopted children, has 3 now, and is a professor at Liberty in the counseling area. And and then I also wrote one with a medical doctor on how the love languages applies with Alzheimer's patients. Wow. It's called Keeping Love Alive as Memories Fade. And this medical doctor's wife had early onset Alzheimer's and 58 years old. And he was the head of the oncology department at our local hospital, became so interested in the disease and, of course, in his wife, that he resigned his position and in the meantime took a master's course in counseling, came back and set up the memory counseling program at our local hospital, where he would meet with couples when one of them had been diagnosed. And one of the first things he did, when they still had cognitive ability, would teach them the love languages, so that as they start into the journey, they're now getting connected even more deeply than they were emotionally. And then it doesn't mean that the person with the disease, that they keep the same love language, because different parts of the brain are being affected. But the love language gives you 5 different ways to tap into them emotionally. And we know the emotional part of the brain is still alive almost to the very end. And so when you hit something that really communicates to them emotionally, even when they can't communicate in words, they will respond. Yeah. He said, my wife's language when she was healthy, gifts was her last important one. But near the end, when I would give her an ice cream cone, she'd say, ooh, ooh, ooh. And I knew I'd touched her. She said, I could live on that for 3 weeks, So it can be very helpful to people that are walking through that journey. So, and then I wrote, God speaks your love language, because people kept asking me, what is God's love language? And I worked through the Bible again. I found out God is fluent in all of them. Yes, he is. All you have to do is listen, and he'll speak your love language.
It's amazing. Dr. Chapman, I'm grateful for all of the work that you have done around these 5 love languages, these different series, how they can be incorporated and applied to all of these unique relationships. Obviously, yes, of course, your marriage, your significant other, but especially with kids, and I think that's so imperative. I work with a lot of kids, so being able to communicate in their primary love language, so that way it deepens, especially even in the counseling setting, that therapeutic alliance, that therapeutic rapport, but also Alzheimer's patients, people within the workforce and workplace, those that you have the opportunity of leading and stewarding and shepherding. All of these things are so imperative. But let me ask you this, sir. How can we begin to continue to apply what you have done, all of the invaluable resources and information? How can we apply that into the counseling setting? I know recently you just came out with your new assessment tool on the 5 love languages. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that and how that can be used in our space in this clinical psychology field.
Yeah, well, I think, of course, sharing the basic concepts with the person, the couple that we're counseling or the individual we're counseling is the beginning place. Because once it's not a hard concept to get, but when you share that concept that we all have a primary love language and that whomever you're relating to, whether it's your spouse or your children or your work associates or whomever, if you can discover their primary love language, and you speak that in the process, of trying to help them, it's going to be much, much more effective. So I think sharing the concept comes first. I think then, depending on their situation, recommending they read a book while you're doing the counseling, because sometimes when they read the book, they're going to hear a lot more than you're going to be able to give them in the hour that you spend with them. And so I think that's why I think that's what motivated me to write books, is to help people that I will never have time to see in my office. And it's been greatly encouraged to see how God has used the books there. And many counselors are responsible for that because they've used the book in helping people in all these situations. As you work with that couple and now you know their primary love language, it can help you in building greater emotional connection with that client. And so I think it has that impact, all positive impact also.
Dr. Chapman, where can all of our listeners, our members, our students who are tuning in today, where can they go to find all of these invaluable resources, all the different books, this new assessment tool? Do you have a specific website that's like a hub for all of these things?
Yeah, it's called 5lovelanguages.com. The number 5, 5lovelanguages.com. Well, for many, many years, we've had a free quiz on there on the love languages. And in fact, my publisher that operates that website said, I think the other day, they told me 133 million people have taken that free quiz.
Wow.
Well, now we have a premium quiz that was created by Les and Leslie Parrott.
Yes.
Many of you, your people would know them. And I think it's called a Premier 5 Love Languages Assessment, which not only gives you, your primary love language and secondary and down the line, but also ties the love language concept in with your personality and a lot of other factors. So it's really a pretty advanced report. And I think in the counseling setting, for counselors to encourage their people to take it. Now, there is a charge for that. The other one's free. There's a charge for this. But I think you'll find it's going to be really, really helpful. I'm excited about it because it's going to give you and your counselee information about themselves and how their personality relates to all of this, as well as other factors. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. It's just been released, actually.
I would encourage all of our listeners and members to go and make sure that you are pressing into and utilizing these invaluable resources, whether it's a quiz, whether it's a book, whether it's this new assessment tool. All of these things, you guys, have been instrumental in my life. So, Dr. Chapman, I can't thank you enough just for what you've done for me. Me and my wife, Evelyn, have read through the 5 Love Languages book. We incorporate those in our daily life. We make sure we're trying to communicate on each other's primary love language on a daily basis. On top of that, I have given out your book as resources to couples, to clients, left and right as homework assignments. So, sir, you have blessed me immensely. I'm grateful for that. But as we close, I told my dad this morning that I was interviewing you, and he said, man, make sure you ask for some Chapman gold, is what he called it. So I'm going to ask you for some Chapman gold as we close, as you continually contribute to the field, but also as you reflect back on all the amazing things that you've done in this space, as you've continued to be just a pioneering leader, as I've mentioned. What are some lessons that you feel like you've learned, Dr. Chapman, along the way that you just want to leave us with as we kind of close this thing out and wrap this thing up and bow tie it all, that you'd say, if you guys get these things right, I truly believe that you'll be able to more effectively care for people God's way?
I think one thing I would say is learning how not to carry the burden of the people you counsel home with you. because I struggled with that in the early days.
Yeah.
I would hear these sad stories. I would take them home, and all evening I'm thinking, oh my goodness, how awful, how painful, you know. And you can't be a long-term counselor and do
That's right.
that. And I first realized I'm not helping them by suffering at home. It's not helping them. And I just asked God, Lord, show me how to handle this, because I can't go on like this with all this stuff on my mind and on my heart. I can't do it. And it just came very clear. The answer was, why don't you turn them over to me? So what I consciously do when they walk out of my office, I turn them over to God. And I say, Lord, please follow up with everything that transpired here today. I put them in your hands. And I don't take their burdens home with me.
Right.
Because we're not meant to carry their burdens.
Right.
So that, I think, is for your own health, your own emotional health and relational health is the first thing I would say, is just learn to release them into God's hands. And then the next week when they come back in, you're going to read your notes and get caught up to where you were last time. And now you're going to, when they're there, they have your full attention. And when they walk out the door, you release them to God. So I think that's the first thing I would say. I think a second thing that I would say is, it's okay to put them on your prayer list.
That's right.
You can pray for them periodically, and then just you bring their case to God, because the Bible's really big on prayer. And so I think praying for the people that you're counseling is also. And the other thing I would say is praying for wisdom yourself. God, give you wisdom. You know, a lesson I learned really early on, even before I started counseling or ministering, I learned it right after college. And that is John 15, verse 5, when Jesus said, I'm the vine, you're the branches. You stay connected to me, you bear much fruit. Without me, you can do nothing. So every time, in every aspect of my life, I'm saying, God, you know, I can't do this without you.
That's right.
Whether it's counseling or whether it's writing, I can't do this without you. And so I'm asking you to give me wisdom in this. And so rather than depending on our own skills and all that we've learned and all of that, and all of that's valuable, all of that's important, to be sure. I'm not condemning that. But rather than putting our reliance in our own abilities, let's put our reliance on God and acknowledge to him that without him, we can do nothing. But with him, of course, great things can be accomplished. So those would be my thoughts.
Man, that is some Chapman gold right there, sir. I appreciate it. Just those last thoughts. Being willing to understand that you don't have to carry the weight of your client's burdens home with you. Being able to surrender, submit those requests up upon God, pray for your clients every day, but then also pray and seek the Lord's face, seek his wisdom, seek his guidance in your life, and make sure that you're submitting your ministry, your mission to the Lord each and every day. Dr. Gary Chapman, I cannot thank you enough again for all of your work, all of your efforts in our space, in our field. Thank you for being a blessing to the church and ultimately to each and every one of us here at the American Association of Christian Counselors. We love and appreciate you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Zach. It was good to be with you. And I'm deeply grateful for what you, your dad, and the whole organization there is doing. So keep up the good work.
Thank you very much, sir.